Canada is the second biggest country in the world. Have you ever wondered what the differences are between the West Coast and the East Coast? Hi, I'm Maria. I was born and raised in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and this is my friend
Marc, and I was born in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada.
And we're going to talk about the differences between the West Coast of Canada and the East Coast of Canada. So let's start with number one, language.
So in New Brunswick, a fun fact is that it is the only province in Canada that is actually bilingual with French and English. Most people during their schooling will learn both English and French.
So it's fully bilingual. Would you say that everybody actually speaks English and French fluently?
I think, no, definitely not. But I think the 30% of New Brunswick is French.
Oh, wow, that's pretty interesting. Because I would say that here in Vancouver, very few people actually speak French fluently. In fact, I would say that Vancouver is a very diverse city. You're going to hear languages from all over the world when you're walking the streets, from Mandarin to, maybe Spanish or Portuguese, languages from all over the world. And I think that's actually really, really cool.
Interesting enough, when I moved here, I noticed that the French you hear in Vancouver is mostly European French as opposed to actual Canadian French.
Oh, tell me more about that.
When I'm walking down the street, I will hear, because there is a huge difference, and we talked about that in the French for Canada classes, there's a huge difference between European French and Canadian French, and just the accent itself, I can tell instantly that they're from France or another part of Europe, as opposed to Quebec or New Brunswick or Nova Scotia.
So what are some of the differences between French Canadian or Canadian French and somebody speaking French from, say, Paris?
There's a lot of differences. The accents are way different. We use different expressions. We actually use different vocabulary, different grammar.
Wow.
Yep.
Grammar.
Yeah, actually the grammar changes. And Canadian French is way less formal.
Oh, wow.
Way less formal.
That's interesting. Well, we also bring that up because Marc is our French-Canadian teacher teaching Canadian French. So if you do want to sign up for online French classes, you will be studying with Marc. I, in fact, will be learning French later on this year with Marc because as a Vancouverite, I don't speak too much French, which is something that we West Coasters probably should do more of.
I mean, why not?
One cool thing about Vancouver is that it's a really diverse city. So you're going to hear people speaking languages from all over the world, from Spanish to Portuguese to Mandarin to Japanese. And I think that's really cool because it gives you the opportunity to learn languages or to make friends with people from all over the world. Is it the same in the East Coast?
Yes and no. The East Coast is very diverse, but it's definitely less than Vancouver or Toronto or any major city. The East Coast doesn't really have any major cities other than Halifax, and the closest one after Halifax would be Montreal, which I don't know if you consider the East Coast necessarily. So the diversity isn't as much, but that being said, immigration right now to the East Coast is massive and more people are moving there. But on the East Coast, definitely the predominant languages are still English and French.
I was born and raised in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and my exposure to French was fairly basic. We learned French growing up from, kindergarten up until grade 8 as a mandatory course. And then after that, it was just an optional elective. So we could switch after grade 8 and we had the option of studying another language as of grade 9. So to be honest, nowadays, I know very basic French, but I do need to study French. And I would say that most people in Vancouver don't speak too much French. At least I don't hear it every day when I'm walking around Vancouver. And I definitely don't see it on street signs or anything like you would in other cities in Canada.
Absolutely. In New Brunswick, most signage is bilingual. In Quebec, the signage is French. You definitely don't see that here.
Okay, number 2, lifestyle. Vancouver is known for having a very health-minded or a very healthy lifestyle. This is probably attributed to the fact that Vancouver is located on the coast. So we have the ocean next to us and we are surrounded by beautiful snowy mountains. So if you like going kayaking, snowboarding, skiing, hiking, Vancouver is definitely the place that you would want to immigrate to or settle down in. It's absolutely stunning here and I absolutely love the fresh air.
I love it here too. Why I came to Vancouver was for all those reasons. The East Coast is definitely health-minded, definitely not as much as Vancouver. The East Coast feel is a lot slower, a lot more laid back, a lot more relaxed.
More relaxed than Vancouver?
Yeah, in a sense. The East Coast feels, and it's beautiful. The East Coast is beautiful. It's got the ocean as well, the Atlantic. It doesn't have the mountains, which is why I'm here. I love the mountains. But there's beautiful scenery on the East Coast. It has an old-fashioned, laid-back, small town feel to it.
Okay. It surprises me to hear that New Brunswick is even slower paced than Vancouver, because Vancouver is known for being so slow already. I mean, I did a video a few years ago with Audra, who was a friend of ours as well, and she's from Toronto, and she calls it Toronto. And Toronto's really like one of the most fast-paced cities in Canada, really cosmopolitan, really go. And she said that Vancouver is a lot slower than Toronto. So for me to hear that New Brunswick is like a lot slower, I don't know if I'd be able to get used to that.
It's very different. It's really nice.
One thing that's pretty cliche about Vancouver is that everybody does yoga. It's a pretty yogi city. I don't do yoga, although I should do yoga. I did go to a meditation class the other day.
Nice.
That was very good.
That's very Vancouver.
And I do confess that I do not know how to ski or snowboard, so I'm not very Canadian in that sense.
You're an outlier.
Although I should learn how to do that too. So these are goals for me as a Canadian.
I'm an East Coaster. We don't even have mountains. And I've been snowboarding and skiing since I was a kid.
How did you learn it?
We have like hills, you know what I mean? The smallest elevation in Vancouver is the biggest elevation in New Brunswick.
I learned how to toboggan and make a snowman.
That's part of it.
Okay. Number 3, the weather. The weather is actually something very important to talk about, especially if you're planning on immigrating to Canada, because let's be real, it is cold here in Canada.
Definitely. A huge difference between the East Coast and Vancouver, for one thing, is that you say it's cold here. It's not. It's not cold here. I'm used to minus 40s. I'm used to minus 30s.
In New Brunswick?
Yeah, absolutely. It happens. Literally just last week, it was minus 25.
Minus 25.
At night, yeah. And that's just a random thing. We're in March. And that's a normal thing,
what?
Really. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I didn't think it got that cold there. I knew it got that cold in Quebec.
No, New Brunswick and Quebec almost have the same climate.
Oh wow, I didn't know it was like that cold. Vancouver's on the coast of British Columbia, so I'm not speaking about all of British Columbia, because obviously if you go out into the Kootenays or the Okanagan, it's going to be a lot colder than say here right along the water. But in Vancouver, you're not going to get those kinds of extreme temperatures. It's usually in the winter, between 0 and 10 degrees. We did have a cold snap this winter, and it got to like minus 10.
For one day.
But it doesn't really get that extreme here in Vancouver. What we do get is a lot of rain. It does rain here. It does get gloomy and gray. But I'll be honest, it's not that bad. I mean, I'm sure in the comments you're going to see people saying otherwise. Yes, you do have to have an umbrella. Yes, you will need to have rain boots. Yes, you will need to have a rain jacket.
Sure.
If you're moving to Vancouver, if you're planning on coming here, those are going to be some staple items in your wardrobe. A typical Vancouverite will need to have a pair of sunglasses and an umbrella for the same day. Because you never know when it's going to be raining, and then the sun might come out in the same day.
All the time.
But I'll be honest, I've just gotten used to it.
I honestly don't think it's that bad. I feel like it's the stereotypical thing to say about Vancouver, but me coming from the East Coast and hearing all those things, hearing that it rains 300 days out of the year, it's not that bad. Yeah, we have 3-4 months where our winter is rain, but we have a ton of sun in the summer and in the springtime as well. And I don't think people really know that. The East Coast, on the other hand, is very extreme. Like I said, it can be minus 40, it can be plus 40.
Wow.
In the summertime, you will get plus 35s, plus 40s nowadays. Very often. And in the winter, opposite extreme. And you never know. One thing I like about the West Coast or Vancouver is it's very stable.
Mm-hmm.
So you know it's going to be 10 degrees today, 10 degrees tomorrow, 9 degrees the day after that. In New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, it can be plus 10 one day, minus 10 the next day, plus 15 the next day,
just
minus
vacillates.
5. It just completely goes bonkers, extremes all the time.
So I have a unique story as well. While I was born in Vancouver in my 20s, I moved to Brazil to teach English. So I lived in Brazil for the majority of my 20s and my early 30s in Rio de Janeiro. So I learned Portuguese there and I experienced what life was like living in a tropical country. And I absolutely loved it because I experienced the sun and living, near the beach every day in Ipanema. And it was an absolutely amazing experience. So for those of you who follow us that are Brazilian, I'm sure that you know how much I love Brazil. Now, I will say that moving back to Canada, and it was a challenge to readjust to the weather. And I will say it took me a couple of years to get used to the weather again. So for those of you who come from a country that has a lot of sun, it will take some time to adjust to the gray skies and maybe the cold, for sure. I'm not going to lie and say that it was easy. It took me, I would say, 2 to 3 years to readjust to the climate and to readjust to life with heavy jackets on, to the rain boots, to the gray skies. And there's something called reverse culture shock. And for me, at least, that was my case because this is my home country. But it was really hard for me my first couple of years. But I have been back for 5 years now, and I honestly see a lot of positives about living here. And the gray skies just don't bother me anymore.
Number 4 is making friends.
Yay, making friends. This was actually kind of controversial.
It is, and I'm on the fence on it.
Why?
Just thinking, like New Brunswick, East Coast, Nova Scotia, they're known culturally for being the nicest people. Like, they'll give you the shirt off their backs. If you need help, you can go to your neighbor, you can go, and it's very stereotypically East Coast, for sure, or even Canadian. A lot of people would say that Vancouver is not the case. Toronto, if you go to other places. So the East Coast is is known for being very polite, very friendly.
Okay. And what do you think about Vancouver? Because you moved here from the East Coast to the West Coast. What has been your experience making friends here?
And for me, I don't know if it's because I'm from the East Coast, but the controversy, I don't see it. For me, Vancouver is a very friendly place too. I don't see making friends being that difficult here, but a lot of people, I know it, I'm sure it's a real thing. A lot of people do complain that it is hard to make friends in Vancouver.
That's what I have heard too. And in fact, when I first moved back from Brazil to Vancouver, I had that same belief. In fact, in one of my older videos, I said that.
Interesting.
And I now want to take that opinion back.
You're shifting.
I'm changing my mind.
Tell me why.
Well, I've been back in Canada for over 5 years now. Can't believe how fast time has gone. And I just don't agree with it anymore. We can change our mind. We can have strong opinions loosely held.
We grow.
Yeah, we grow and we change our minds and we evolve. And I've realized that, Vancouverites, they are polite and friendly, and it's possible to make friends with Vancouverites, but it does take some time to, break the shell.
Absolutely.
And to get to know them. But you have to make an effort. It's not as easy, perhaps, as in, a Latin American country or a culture where not everybody, of course, we can't generalize, but it's fairly easy. When I lived in Brazil, it was very easy to make friends because it's a very social country, right? You could go to a party or any event, and it was so easy to just connect with people, and suddenly it felt like everybody was my friend. And here, people are very to themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
They're a little bit more buttoned up, a little bit more, I'm not going to say the word introverted, but they're more to themselves. There's a difference.
Reserved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're not friendly or open to making new friends.
I often hear, especially compare Vancouver to other parts of Canada, that Vancouver, the people are cold. I definitely don't agree with that. I think Vancouverites are very friendly, they're very kind, and once you get to know them, once they open up, they are the opposite. They're extremely kind, extremely nice, the opposite of cold.
Yes, and another thing I would like to mention, especially for those of you in our community that follow us, are likely people who are immigrants or English learners or French learners. It's to make the effort to communicate or to become friends with people who are not from your home country. There's nothing wrong, of course, with making friends with people from your home country when you move to Canada. But if you want to immerse yourself in the English or French language, it's very important to start speaking with people from other countries, especially with native speakers.
Absolutely.
When I first moved back from Brazil, I found myself staying in my comfort zone where I intentionally only hung out with Brazilians because, like I said, I love Brazil. And I would say my first 3 years, I only hung out with Brazilians. And then I realized that I was doing the exact same thing that I was telling my students not to do.
Ironic.
I was hanging out with Brazilians all the time. Again, love my Brazilian community, love my Brazilian friends. So then I intentionally started making friends with people from Canada, from people from all over the world, not just from, native speakers of Canada, but from, other countries as well. And I've now made friends intentionally from Iran, from Japan, from the Philippines. And I've made some really cool connections in the city. And that's one of the cool parts about living in Vancouver is that you have that opportunity to connect with people from all over the world.
Absolutely. That's true. Whether you are going to the East Coast or the West Coast, I think what Maria just said is an extremely important thing. You should definitely put effort into getting to know people outside of your own culture, get out of your comfort zone, and meet some new people.
Yeah.
Number 5 is amenities and landscape. Tell me about what you think Vancouver has for amenities and landscape.
Vancouver is known as the city of glass, and that's because the buildings are all fairly similar to each other. They are, of course, made of glass, and it's a pretty new city. So if you take a look at Vancouver, like Yaletown or downtown, most of the buildings are fairly new, and they all look really similar to each other. The oldest part of the city, Gastown, it's fairly well reserved, and there are some historic buildings. I absolutely love the cute little heritage houses that you can find throughout the city, but otherwise, most of the city is fairly brand new. One of my favorite parts about living in Vancouver is having access to the seawall, which runs all around the city, or all around downtown, right around Olympic Village as well, around Science World. And you can really go for a walk or ride your bike all around the seawall, all around UBC, the University of British Columbia, get a great workout and really just see the entire city and just be exposed to the sea breeze. I love the fresh air here, so it's one of my favorite parts about living in Vancouver. How about you?
One thing that I love here is the seawall. I'm there every day. It's a fantastic amenity. I don't think there's anything like it in Canada. It's beautiful. It's amazing. The East Coast is much more. It's definitely less urban. Like I said, it has a more small town vibe to it. But the East Coast is called the Maritimes for a reason. The Atlantic Ocean is a huge thing, a huge tourist attraction. The Peggy's Cove, the lighthouses are always a huge attraction. Completely different. Definitely less of a city vibe, more of a go outside in the outskirts and visit the ocean, visit the beaches. There are beautiful forest trails, lots of hiking, but definitely not compared to, there's no cities of glass on the East Coast.
So they're mostly small houses, or do they have lots of condominiums?
Again, depending if you are in St. John, New Brunswick, or in Halifax, of course, or maybe even St. John's, Newfoundland. Mm-hmm. The cities are bigger. But other than that, it always has that small town vibe.
So do most people live in houses or apartments?
I feel like it's changing now, but for the longest time, yeah, absolutely. Most people lived in houses.
Okay. Because in Vancouver, it really depends on your neighborhood. If you're in downtown, most people live in apartments, although there is the West End, which, there's still apartments. But if you live in the suburbs, most people are going to live in townhomes or in houses. Although there are some neighborhoods that, are developing, like Richmond, or, most suburbs even have apartments now. Vancouver is developing quite a bit. So you'll see a lot of apartment living throughout all of the greater Vancouver area, actually.
Absolutely. I think that's true too of the East Coast. Major development is happening there in all provinces on the East. It's growing very rapidly, but it still doesn't compare to a city like Vancouver or Calgary.
Interesting. Okay, so those were 5 differences between the East Coast and West Coast. If you have any other differences that you'd like to talk about, leave them in the comments below. And if you want to improve your Canadian English, your Canadian French, or if you're preparing for your IELTS, CELPIP, or PTE test, get in touch with our team here at EnglishForCanada.com, and we'll be more than happy to help you out. See you soon. So if you like going hiking or skiing or snowboarding,